Professor Jonathan Brockopp is an associate professor of history and religious studies. He received his master and PhD from Yale University. MashaAllah. He's considered a historian of religion who specializes on Islam. His primary research focus is on the literary remains of early Islam, including the Quran, Hadith, legal and theological texts. He's going to facilitate this discussion with 4 different students from different Muslim background. So please, everyone, welcome Professor Jonathan Brockopp and his students.
Great, thanks so much. Can you hear me? Is the microphone working well? Yeah, okay. Well, I guess I gotta speak closely to it. How's that? Is that better? So, when I was asked to talk about the diversity of the Muslim world, I immediately thought that we should have a discussion that demonstrates that diversity, rather than have me lecture to you about that diversity. But before I introduce the panelists, let me say a few things that are familiar to all of you, and yet such a part of your lived experience may not be something that you think about very often. And that's the real enormous diversity of the Muslim world, just how huge it is, and what a large section geographically of the world it encompasses. And so we have to go all the way over to Southeast Asia, to the borders of China, and on the one hand, and kind of a big belt right across the middle of the world, all the way to North Africa and Western Africa. And all that is not only the Muslim world today, but historically, for the past 600 years at least, defines the Muslim world. One of the things that's interesting for me as a researcher is to look at the way those parts of the world continue to interact with one another. And a unique aspect of Islam, all familiar to you, is the pilgrimage. And the fact that Muslims from all over the world come together and focus on this single event of millions of Muslims each year getting together in Mecca for this pilgrimage. That extraordinary diversity then that happens at the pilgrimage, you may know, is tied to a really significant event in the life of African American Islam and African American experience altogether. And how many of you know the story of Malcolm X and his pilgrimage to Mecca? Okay, so about half of you. So Malcolm X, of course, was brought up and converted first to the Nation of Islam. That was his understanding of Islam as a follower of the Nation of Islam. And in that understanding, there was a strongly racialized notion of black Americans and black religion. But he continued his spiritual search, and that led him to undertake the pilgrimage, where he was really kind of shocked to find Muslims of all different colors and shapes and sizes represented at the pilgrimage. And that for him transformed his notion of his own religion, transformed his understanding of Islam and the role that Islam could play within the African American experience, within the American civil rights movement. That powerful experience is in some ways an exact reflection of a well-known Quran verse, I'm sure all of you know, about how God says that God made humankind in tribes and nations, and in order for people to know one another. And this notion of this knowing one another through this diversity that Malcolm X had, that was part of the pilgrimage, is also, it seems to me, part of American Islam. And all of you, whether you come from the United States or not, living in the United States, you experience here at Penn State, at your mosques in Philadelphia, or wherever your home is, you experience that diversity all the time. It's a very rich experience, very different from the experience of going to mosque in separate Muslim countries. Because of all the languages, all of the different ethnic practices, the different foods that you associate with. So one of the things we want to do today is really explore that diversity and how is that diversity experienced? First of all, by our panelists, and I'm going to ask them all, first of all, to introduce themselves a little bit. And then we want to extend our discussion to you, and to really engage you in discussion, to hear you, ask your questions, and offer your reflections on the whole experience of Muslim diversity. So that's kind of our plan. And I'm going to ask May, she started introducing herself. Tell us your name, a little bit about your family background, and maybe a reflection or two about what diversity in Islam means to you.
Hi, my name is May. I'm from Crane, Pennsylvania, but I was born in Egypt. My dad was from Cairo and my mom was from Alexandria. And we've been living in Pennsylvania for quite some time, so I think like the majority of my life was spent in the U.S. Diversity to me, like especially within Islam and like the whole or like any religion really, is pretty much just like different perspectives and different points of view, not just like cultures in different regions of the world, but also like opinions regarding different subject matters regarding the religion, because I mean different people coming from different parts of the world have like different ways of looking at things. They have different interpretations of certain rules, etc. So to me that's like the most important aspect of diversity.
Thank you.
My name is Hamza, and I was born and raised in New Jersey, and my parents are both from Egypt. So diversity within Islam to me means, like, well, before coming to college, I didn't experience that much diversity. I remember going to Umrah once, and I saw like different, I was like, whoa, there's like Malaysians and different, like, I didn't know that there was that many people of, like, other than Arab, like Muslims, you know. So after coming to college, I realized there's just like a whole plethora of like different individuals and different, just what May was saying, like different thoughts and interpretations. I always thought that there was like certain things that were like, you know, strictly haram and strictly like halal, but like, which is, haram means like permitted, or and then halal means like something that's kind of prohibited or something. Wait, did I say haram means? Yeah, I said it right? Okay, sorry, I'm a little nervous. But yeah, so I mean, after that, after coming here and just like having different discussions, especially since I am involved in MSA a lot, I tend to have a lot more religious discussions than other students would.
My name is Mohammed. As you know, I was born and raised in Iraq. I was born in Baghdad, however, I lived in another city called Ramadi, which is west of Baghdad. I moved here 5.5 years ago. I came to Penn State 2 years, and I'll be graduating hopefully this semester. My idea of diversity, I guess I can't really put it in better words than I'm going to put it, was diverse. إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. We made you into different countries and different tribes to know one another, to understand one another, and to learn from each other. So that's I can't put it in better words than that.
My name is Muhammad Saad. I was born in Pakistan. I moved to United States in 2007. I moved to Philadelphia. I'm here in Penn State for the last 3 years. I will be graduating in fall. And diversity to me is basically, I think everybody said, I agree with what I was saying. But the Islam is, we have the same religion, but we speak different languages. And our traditions are different than others, not on the base of religion, on the base where we live. There are a lot of things we do in Islam, but people try to modify according to their culture and their tradition. And some people go to the extreme, and some people are moderate. It depends where you live in the country and which country you live in. First time in my life, I noticed diversity in Penn State. I meet different people. taught a bit of the basic things, but there are certain things we not very, which is more minor. That's make us very diverse.
Great, thank you all. So one of the problems we have to face is really even defining what diversity is. So you hear these different perspectives, and picking up on what Saad was saying, part of the notion of diversity is seeing diversity, right? What do you think is the same, and what do you think is different? I recall one of the things that I do when I teach feminism in Islam is I've got a picture that I took up on the citadel in Egypt. And if you know anything about Cairo, the citadel is a favorite place for people to go, say on a weekend afternoon with the families, to stroll along and get the good air and look over the city. And a clear day, you can actually see the pyramids from the top, and it's really lovely. So I have this picture of these different families, and I ask my students to comment on what they see in terms of women's dress. And their immediate response is, oh, they're all veiled. And then I ask them to look more closely and to see what's going on. And if you know anything about Cairo society, you start to see that there are really important but subtle differences in exactly how these women are wearing the headscarf. And I'm sure all of you know this, right? So on the one hand, my students are seeing the same. They're seeing the similarity. They're all veiled, right? But then when I start to break it down, and I would say anybody from Cairo would look and say, oh, well, she's got hers tucked in this way. She's wearing hers, out broadly like this. Hers is black. Hers is multicolored. She's got a pantsuit on. She's wearing Islamic dress, right? All these differences that are really important. So do you see similarity, or do you see difference? And sometimes it requires you to get outside of your daily perspective to see that difference, or to even consider what it might mean to somebody. And in some cases, like you said with the Umrah, you might grow up in Egypt and in the US and still have the impression that most Muslims are Arabs, when in fact less than 20% of Muslims speak Arabic. So the vast majority of the Muslim world is not the Arab world, is represented by South Asian Muslims or Southeast Asian Muslims. The largest geographical concentration is actually in South Asia, and the largest Muslim country in the world is in Southeast Asia. So that diversity may not be aware of that, may not see that, unless you get out and undertake the Umrah, or unless you're here and you see all the diversity that you find here at Penn State. So I'm going to ask, first of all, this experience for those of you who could, well, all of our panelists can make this contrast for us, because even though they live in the US, they've spent lots of time overseas as well. The difference in daily Muslim practices between living in a Muslim country and living in a majority non-Muslim country. So I'm not going to specify that. I want to just see how you all respond to that. And how have you experienced that difference in terms of normal, everyday Muslim practices? Do you have, yeah, go ahead.
So, like I said, and like most of you know, living in a Muslim country makes Islam easier in some ways. For example, on Friday, all the shops and everything is closed because people know this is Friday prayer, this is time to worship. So it's easier for you to go pray with everybody going to pray.
I'm sorry, are they closed all day on Friday?
Depends. For example, schools close on Friday.
Okay.
Shops, they usually close for that period of prayer. And some people will leave work after 12 o'clock and then they go.
Yeah.
So they have something to do.
Right. Every country defines the weekend differently. Yeah. But go ahead. Yeah.
So, which makes things a lot easier. For example, here, you have to make an effort. That's why we have 2 Friday prayers. We have one on campus at a different time, one off campus at a different time, to make make sure that everybody who has class or something. So you have to make an effort. Going to the mosque is the same problem we face. Over there, most people who you know, you see every day, they go to the mosque. It's a small community that you interact with. So if you don't show up, people will ask about you. People say, okay, where have you been? Why haven't you shown up? So here, I got to experience actually real Islam, because here, truly, no one is really watching you. It's all on you. For you to go to the mosque or not to go, it's on you. For you to sit at home and pray, it's also on you. And that's something that I think most Muslims have forgot about, where in our countries, Islam became sort of a tradition and ways that we do. It became part of our daily lives, and we don't have an understanding of the meaning behind Islam, which is true faith. So if people don't stay with the same routine, do the same routine every day, then we will not really fully understand the true meaning of Islam. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else want to respond to specific differences they've noticed about practices here as compared to?
Well, I remember going to Egypt. I spent there like the whole summer once. It was like 3 to 4 months. And I remember first going in there, I was just like, wow, this is a very Islamic country. I get to you hear the adhan all the time, and it's literally, you can hear it go through your house. And after a while, it was just like, if you pass that, or the next adhan goes on and you didn't pray, you kind of feel that guilt or something. Or there's a general kind of in the house, there's kind of a push to pray, you haven't prayed yet, we're all praying right now, what's going on? And I think for me, it was a really good. It's good because it was for me. I was just going on vacation for the summer, so it was very good jump start to my faith, kind of. But I think if I lived there the whole time, I lived my whole life was there, I think I wouldn't be able to be tested on my faith and my persistence with it. I feel like I would do some kind of practices and not really have the full pure intention behind it and motivation to do it or something, because I wouldn't here, just like what Muhammad was saying, no one's watching, so there's no push for you to do it, or there's no kind of social pressure. But so I think balancing between both, it's been kind of an enriching experience, at least for me.
I'll just have to rephrase what I said. No one's watching you, however, in Islam we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes. No human being is watching you. Yeah. So this raises this question about, you said in some ways you experienced real Islam coming here, but so what is real Islam? And in a way, is it that personal experience? That's the bigger question that May was asking, right? In terms of diversity. Is it that personal experience that you feel because no other human being is watching you, so you must hear this? Or is Islam fundamentally a community experience? And so it's harder to experience real Islam in that sense if you're not in a community, if you're not hearing the adhan all the time, if shops come close at sunset or dawn.
After doing all that realization and just self-exploration, kind of figuring things out on my own, coming here and finding this bigger Muslim community. I mean, not too big, but big enough. I feel like that also kind of created a support system. So in a way, kind of evened out. It gave me a chance to figure things out on my own. But then after I asked all my questions and I came up with all these possible solutions, I actually found people to bounce off ideas and just figure things out together.
Yeah. So, this raises this larger issue also that Sal was talking about in terms of culture and religion. And those of us who study religion for a profession have a hard time making a distinction between religion and culture. Because so many times cultural experiences are expressed in a religious way. So people are using religious language to talk about something that's cultural is in fact religious. When you look at a country like Egypt with a significant percentage of Christians who are Egyptians, and Copts, in fact, the very word Copt actually is the English word Egypt. It's the same, comes from the same root. They're Egyptians. They sometimes consider themselves to be Arabs, depending on who you're talking to. They certainly are fluent and speak Arabic on a day-to-day basis. And many of their cultural practices are the same as the Muslims who live in Egypt. Certain things like Shamanisim is just a holiday that everybody celebrates. It's not particularly Christian, it's not particularly Muslim, it's something that's cultural. And yet, is that how people talk about that religiously? One of the interesting things for me was coming back after living in Egypt for a year, is it just struck me what a Christian country this is. The U.S. never seemed like a Christian country until I lived in a Muslim country and then came back here and kind of realized, oh my gosh, this is really a Christian country. And you don't necessarily experience those things unless you have that sense of contrast. So living in this Christian country, at least culturally Christian country, you really see that break between religion and culture. Because we practice Islam here, and in terms of finding 5 times a day to leave work or classes or whatever to perform the prayer, in terms of Friday prayer, in terms of all these other sorts of cultural practices, you really have to separate yourself from this Christian culture in order to undertake that practice. But when you're home, right, whether it's Iraq or Pakistan or Egypt or wherever that may be, and you don't have that distinction, what do you see there as a distinction between culture and religion? How do you find that in Iraq? How do you find that in Pakistan? How do you find that in Egypt? In what ways there is in Pakistan? Are there practices? Because it seems to me like Pakistan is a Muslim country. I mean, it's the country of the pure, after all, right?
Well, I think all the countries well, there are many culture, it's not like Islam, but for example, when people get married, the woman families get adopted. And it's a hot debate in my country right now because there are a lot of people that don't get married because they don't have enough money.
Can you hold the mics?
Yeah, you need to hold the mic
Can't hear it.
right to your mouth.
So,
Really even closer.
You really can hear it.
Hold on. There you go. Yeah.
so it's really a hard debate right now. People talking about how people persist in the country for years. Culturally, got like 60 years ago, 60, 70 years, Pakistan and India was one country.
Yeah.
And there were like different cultures and traditions were there because there were different religions like Hinduism, Christianity, Muslims, and Sikhism. So dowry is their tradition. So basically, Muslim countries like Pakistan is because we are foreign, like people are assuming to say we are foreign Hinduism because we have the dowry to be a woman. But on the other side, the religious people, they say dowry is haram. It's not allowed in Islam. So basically, this is a conflict between culture and religion. Also, there's another in winter, there is a tradition for Hinduism is like example. They have caste.
If you didn't hear it, the sign, it's called.
Yes, yes, it's a tradition in South Asia, East Asia. They will have caste. So basically, when apple comes, it's after when the crops are ripe, and then they have crops and other plantations. So they celebrate they get their food and especially Hinduism culture. But Pakistan was also celebrating for the last 20 years. But people are talking about against established religion or Pakistan tradition. They are trying to separate. They are too extreme. Some people say because it's part of the culture, so it's haram and stuff. Because anything non-Muslims do, Muslims should not do the same way. So that's what's happening.
Yeah, thank you. Those are really great examples. Does anybody else have any examples of differences between culture and religion in either Egypt or Iraq?
So, if you know anything about Iraq, you realize that it's a very, very tribal country. In the city I lived in, you see a lot of the traces of the tribal culture more than the religious culture. For example, there is an invitation for somebody, you'll see that they'll cook a lot of food and mostly waste a lot of food. Even though in Islam it's not allowed to waste food. You have to make sure you have good portions for everyone. However, culturally and tribally, you will look bad if you don't have more than enough. If you didn't slaughter, I don't know how many sheep, and I'm sure it's in many countries also. So you see that distinction, between Islam and culture. Another thing you see is during Eid, for example, is people wearing new clothes, money is given from older. It's supposed to be like that. However, there's nothing in Islam that really states that. So it's a lot, like you said, subtle differences in culture. You see them being practiced, however, they didn't develop in Islam. But because Iraq is such a diverse, we have Christians, we have Kurds, we have Arabs, Christians are Arabs
And you have Shi'i and Sunni.
and we have Shi'is and Sunnis, and we had Jewish people living in Iraq. Yes, so a lot of things that got influenced from other cultures, maybe other religions got inserted part of your religion. And you see a lot of the older people practice these things and even say things. One of the things we were talking about, a friend of mine, he's in archaeology. And in Iraq, they have something called the seven eyes. In Islam, we believe in something. If somebody sees your car, you have a new car, then they'll say he'll envy you, and then you might have something bad happens to you. So in Islam, we have that. So that's why we recite Quran or something like that. But in Iraq, we have something like it's like an artifact. It's just a blue artifact that has 7 holes in it, and it's originally apparently from a very old culture in Iraq that developed. However, people use it. People put it in their houses, and it has nothing to do with Islam. It has nothing to do with any religion. It's just something that was developed over the years, and people just adopted it. So you see these things, and I'm sure if I go back now after experiencing Islam here, and actually asking questions about Islam practice and why do I do this and why do I practice this? When I go back, I'm sure I'll see more differences in the cultures. Okay, you're doing this with this. Where is this in Islam? How can you do this?
Yeah, great. Do you want to add to that? That's all right. So, you get the idea of the areas that we're interested in talking about, right? That different kinds of diversity, geographic diversity, diversity of experience in the U.S., diversity of experience in other countries, ways that Islam is practiced, culture and religion, how do we even define what that is, whether we see difference, whether we don't see difference. So all of these things all fit into diversity. And I think at this point we'd love to have some questions or comments from you, members of our audience, to our panelists or to one another. There's a microphone right there, so why don't you just come on up if you would, please.
Hi, my name's Sarah. I don't know if you know me, but as a student, I really want to travel and experience that, but as a woman, I'm unsure if I go to that country, is it uncommon to see women who aren't Muslims, who don't have cover or anything like that?
Great, thank you very much.
I feel like it depends on like the country that you go to. I know in Egypt it's pretty common since there is a good majority of there's a good group of like Christians and stuff. So like it is common to see women that are unveiled. I mean it's mostly the focus in Egypt is mostly on like your dress rather than like what's on your head. Usually women cover up a little bit more even if they are unveiled. Yeah, I know that in other Arab countries or other like Muslim countries, it's sometimes they're more conservative. So I don't know, maybe you guys have a say.
So I have to tell a funny story, because what you say is not just true about women, but for men too, right? This idea of modest dress, it's very important. And my example is my wife's cousin, actually, who was in Egypt. And downtown Cairo, really hot day, 95 degrees out. It's Cairo, you know, just normal. And he's from the Midwest, from Indiana, and he's walking right along the Corniche right along the Nile River. And so he takes his shirt off, which is totally normal in Indiana, right? It's like traffic stops in Cairo. I mean, it's shocking, just shocking, this idea, especially that this Westerner would take his shirt off in the middle of, so it really, modesty, and this applies both to men and women, but also it marks class too, because you will see lower class people who dress very differently than upper class people. People from the city dress differently from people from the country. And this is the case in Egypt. It's also, I imagine, the case in Iraq and Pakistan. Is that right?
So I don't know if you plan on traveling to Iraq, but if you do, I would hold off a little bit until things settle down. But
Not because of the dress, though.
no, not because of the dress thing. So, for example, like I said, I was born in Baghdad. Baghdad is very, very open. It's the capital city in Iraq. It's very open, so it's very common to see people walk not wearing hijab and wearing the dress you're wearing right now. Very, very common. You see that. And I'm sure it's spread out to other cities in Iraq. So, you know, it depends on, I guess, where you go. I'm not sure about other countries as far as Pakistan.
Maybe the audience can provide, I know there's a couple of different people, like Muslims from different countries. Maybe you guys can provide like insight onto like the women and dress and stuff.
I know in Saudi Arabia, yeah, I'm from Saudi Arabia, and I know in Saudi Arabia, if like a foreign woman comes to the country, she has to cover her body and public. But it depends on the city. Like if you're in Jeddah or Riyadh or like what's the eastern part, like you're allowed to not cover your hair. But if you go to Medina, then you have to cover your hair. And yeah, so basically all women have to they have to cover their bodies with their Saudi Arabia.
So this diversity also is diversity in time. So Egypt now, I would say it's more common than not, even in Cairo or Alexandria, to see women with hijab, with a scarf and a hat. But even 20 years ago, that'd be 20 years ago, it'd be very unusual to see a woman 20 years ago wearing a headscarf. So, and in Jeddah today you can, but in Jeddah 20 years ago, no way. Right? So things change in different countries over time. And what's acceptable in terms of dress for both men and women in Kabul is not the same thing as in commodity. It's not the same thing in Feds. So there are also local ideas. This is now religion and culture, right? Because modesty is fundamentally locally defined. We want to talk about what modesty is according to the law for men. Modesty is to cover anybody know what's required for men. No. From the navel to the knees. From here down, yeah, okay. But still, if I'm wearing something that leaves my shoulders open and my arms open, right, that's like today, that would be really odd. I mean, if I dressed that way, I was going to say as a professor, right, that would seem really disconcerting to you, because that offends American ideas of what modesty is, right? So we have these rules of modesty, and these rules are not just Muslim rules, right? There are very clear rules in the United States of what you can and cannot do in terms of men and women's dress. I mean, really, how many men do you see who violate the rules about hair being short? How many women do you see who violate rules by shaving their heads? It's very unusual in the United States. So these rules are universal in terms of dress, but they're also locally defined. Great question, thank you. What are the kinds of questions for our panelists? Yes, could you come up to the microphone, please? You have to hold it close.
Hey, I'm Eric. So my question is, are there any cities here in America where there's a lot of immigrants from countries, say like Philly or Pittsburgh, or not so much?
Great question. Are there any, so the question was, are there any particular cities in the United States where there are large concentrations of Muslims, or from particular countries as well? And a number of you are from Philly, so you can speak to that. But the short answer is yes. The longer answer is much more interesting. It's like,
Yeah, from Philly, I guess we don't have that many people from Iraq. We have, depends on where you go, close around the Philly area, I guess in southeast Philly, you see a lot of concentration of Muslims. And you can see it in the mosque. When you go to the mosque and pray, and so you see this culture is dominant. And there are a lot of Egyptians there. So I don't know. I guess as far as it is. As far as states go, I think Chicago. I know we have a lot of Iraqis in Chicago and Michigan. There's Michigan, huge concentrations of Iraq. You go there, even the stores are written in Arabic. So people speak Arabic in the streets there. When my friends visited, and they say, somebody, yes. If people speak English, people look at you, it's like, where are you from? So they changed it to an Iraqi city. So if you ever want to visit Iraq in the States, go to Dearborn, Michigan.
Most people, Muslims, I see they're from Pakistan, Palestine, from Palestine, more of the Palestinian people, especially because so there are like 3 mosques they are built by Palestinian people.
I know that where I'm from in Jersey, there's a couple of cities. There's Jersey City, Patterson, even Penn State. They're all divided upon usually upon your language and where you come from. I know a couple of Egyptian mosques. I know ones that are mainly Lebanese people. I know different types, but yeah, it really does. Depending on where the culture you come from, people feel more comfortable going there.
so that of course gets us back to religion and culture, right? Because why is it? why do you suppose it is that if you're in a large enough city with a large enough concentration of Muslims, that the Muslims in those cities then tend to congregate in mosques that are defined by culture? So theoretically, right, Islam is even against cultural difference. That's this idea of the Ummah, that these cultural differences should matter. And yet, what is it that makes it more comfortable, as you say, to be in a mosque than where that diversity is in fact minimized? And I have to say that the opposite is true there too. So when you're in a small place like State College, the State College Mosque is full of people from an immense diversity of areas. So smaller towns then have to have that diversity in a way. The larger ones don't. Anyway, what do you think? Why is it? Why is it that Muslims split up this way?
So I guess when you leave to a new country, a new culture, it's in some way scary. Not in we're kids and we're young and we're scared. In some way, you're afraid that I'm here by myself. I'm alone. So you try as much as you can to surround yourself with people. First of all, who are Muslims. So the first, I guess, step you take is maybe come to an MSA meeting or go to the mosque to try to meet other Muslims. The second step you take is when you meet people from your own country. It's very easy for you to talk to them. It's very easy for you. You understand one another. You have the same culture, you have the same understanding, the same language, the same dialogue, I should say. So it's very easy for you to conversate with them, to talk about things which are similar to one another. However, in many areas, I'm not with that notion where you see, sometimes even in the mosque, you see an Iraqi group and a Egyptian group, and they all sitting separated from one another. Because they're missing out, I believe, they're missing out on something, an opportunity that you have here, especially in State College. And then I guess mainly State College have that because it's college town. So you have people from all over the country, from all over the world who study here. So you're missing out on an opportunity to meet people from other cultures and learn from them, and really leave that idea of cultural differences and separation behind you, and stay under, like I said, the Ummah, which is the one nation under Islam, which will make things much easier for you. Because, and that's where it comes down. The first thing you mentioned in pilgrimage. When you go to Mecca, you see everybody wearing the same dress, no differences. You see someone from Africa praying next to somebody from Asia, next to somebody from America, next to somebody from Europe. There's no differences. We're all wearing the same dress. To emphasize the importance of, even though you're different, you're still praying to the same direction, and you still are all the same.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? I would love to hear maybe from some of you out there perspectives that we've missed so far in terms of the diversity of Islam. And we've been focusing on the ways this can be largely positive, but it can also cause difficulties as well. And it's really important, I think, that if we're going to be true to that Quran verse, to get to know one another, to hear each other's stories. So I really encourage you to share with us some of your stories of Muslim diversity.
Kind of touch upon what you guys were saying. Here we go. So to kind of touch upon what you guys were saying about diversity in the States and how mosques have been broken up. I know that a lot of it is language based, but I feel like it's also that comfort that you have within a community. Like, because even though all the countries that I tend to be from are somehow interconnected, we all do have different customs and beliefs, and like different institutions exist within our countries. And something that might be appropriate for one country is not for another. And while I'm very much for completely mixing, I know that there are a lot of people who aren't, and it's simply that feeling of comfort. You know, like wherever we go, even when there are, you know, multiple mosques are hosting like a renowned speaker, you know, people will separate based on where they come from and what they know, and it's as simple as, you know, knowing your community, having your comfort, and things like that. And then I kind of wanted to ask about, you know, what you guys have all seen about diversity within Penn State to go along with our theme. You know, because, I mean, I came from a relatively diverse community since I live right outside of New York City. So there are the separations between the Arabs and the Pakistanis and the Afghans, and everybody does come together for certain things, like shopping or like famous speakers mostly. But at the same time, we are all separated. And I think the youth today have really worked hard in combining efforts. And it started off with being something that was like a monetary necessity, but it has continued into becoming like a flourishing friendship between groups. So my question was, I guess to repeat, like, what does diversity mean for you now within State College? Sorry.
Okay, so I'm gonna kind of go around and then answer your question, because like what everyone was saying about the whole separation in groups kind of within Islam, and like speaking from personal experience, when you come from like a society in which you're like the only person from a certain country with a certain religion, and then you show up to a place like this campus where you find other people like you. I mean, I remember when I first met my when I first met an Egyptian Muslim, I was like, wow, I heard so much about you, let me know you. And I was like really excited to like actually, it was kind of like a selfish curiosity kind of to like know how someone who shares that much with me would like act in a certain situation or behave in social occasions. And I don't know, that it was kind of like magnetic in that way. So diversity in State College, like after I got over that whole initial like shock of like finding other people who were similar to me, in that sense, like, I don't know, I find it kind of like exciting or just kind of intriguing to figure out things and like, kind of like a Venn diagram, like talking to other people and seeing like my differences between them and me and the things that we do share that are in common, like not just like food and culture, but like also mentalities and how they think things out and their opinions regarding like certain subjects and like so on, so.
Okay, well, I think going off the whole diversity thing, I know that for me, like, it's always easier, like, you know, having the mosques that are of your culture and of your language that you speak and the background that you're from, it's easier to, like, go in and, like, kind of sort of dissolve in that kind of environment, because it is like they wear your hijab, like they wear the hijab similar to you. They do things similar to you. No one's gonna look at you like differently because you're doing something that's maybe a little bit off, or like it's just you know, off in terms of like them looking at you differently because this is something that you've always done, right? Like I've always, like, since I started wearing hijab, this is always how I've worn it, but I know that some people find it like, oh, that's different, like, that's like weird the way you do it, but it's like that physical differences, and I've always kind of been like, kind of a little bit like scared of being like judged or something, because, or wanting to like mold or immediately relate to the person in front of me. So I think this environment, like Penn State, has forced me to like kind of accept the diversity, to like pick at questions that are hard and have difficult dialogues. Yeah, so I mean, it's been hard at first, but I feel like we've kind of broken the barriers and probably the stigma behind, like, you know, our differences and.
really amazing because I met different people from different countries. They are Muslims, and I learned about how they behave and their tradition is different. But basically, we have the same religion. And I met Muhammad. And I learned so much about Iraq. Similarly, I met one of my friends in Egypt. He's from Egypt. I learned a lot of things from him. And similarly, I met a lot of Pakistani too. Even though I'm from Pakistan, I didn't know a lot about my country, but I learned because he was a different part of my country. So basically, I learned a lot about, and there were a lot of misconceptions about different cultures that I erased when I met these people.
Any other questions? There are a lot of areas that we haven't covered, a lot of aspects of diversity that a person can go into. We were talking as a panel about diversity within single countries and diversity then, as you said, from one culture to another. There's also this problem, I think, that you have when you come to a place like Penn State and you're dealing with these Americans who have no idea really where Pakistan is, you know, who can't tell Alexandria from Cairo from Aswan, and have only the vaguest notion. I mean, so when I was living over in Egypt back in 1990, that was the first Gulf War and the first bombing of Baghdad, and my brother-in-law asked me, "So can you hear the bombing from there?" Not realizing that it was thousands of miles away. But so this becomes very difficult then I think also, this is the last question I really have for you, about how you experience then all that means not just Islam, but all of the cultural identities that you bring with you, how you experience that in the United States, and how do you then try to tell people who think of Muslims as all alike, that in fact there is a wondrous diversity within the Muslim world.
Okay. A lot of people ask me where you're from, and I told them like I'm from Pakistan. So second question they ask me, what part of Middle East is and that's kind of funny because a lot of people don't know Pakistan is basically in Asia.
Right.
Well, whenever I meet like new people, and they also ask about a different question about Middle Eastern culture that I have no idea about them.
Or about Arabic.
About Arabic, yes,
Yeah.
but they don't know. I speak Urdu, that's national language, and also we have a lot of regional languages. What was even I know a lot of people back in my country, they only speak regional language. They don't even speak the national language. Like I'm the part from southeastern Pakistan, where a lot of people speak Swahili. I know, but even my grandma, she never spoke Urdu because she had no idea how to speak. So because of her, I learned to speak Swahili. So,
Yeah, it's hard. Last comment,
I had the same I guess, encounters with people when you meet me first where you from, say from Iraq. Then you get all these questions, and it's like, oh, how do you guys ride camels? Do you go? And sometimes it's absurd, but I'm more than happy to hear them ask a question. It's better that they ask than they assume. So for me, I take it as an opportunity that, you know what, okay, I'm here now. I have all this knowledge, and they're asking. That means they're interested in learning. So one day, maybe they meet someone who has that also misconception about our countries, and they can fix that. So I'll take it. I'll say whatever questions you have asked. There's no, never been in the country. You've never been outside. You've only known what about my country, what you've seen on TV, and most of it was. It doesn't show the normal daily life of our countries, normal daily lives of our people. So it's a great opportunity, and one of the great things about this university is we have that diversity, and we have people who can, ask other people. So if you meet someone who's from a different country, just ask. You never know what you can learn or what you can find out about that country.
Great advice.
So yeah, pretty much just like everyone else said. I mean, I tell people I'm originally from Egypt, and they're like, "Oh, pyramids, cool." I'm like, yeah, cool. And like the conversation usually just ends there. I have, and I was like maybe 5. So it's not really relevant to my life in that sense, but and usually like the conversation ends there, or just because like I'm terrible at making conversation, so they feel unwelcome to ask questions, but like usually they just like kind of walk off with like all these assumptions, and like you were saying before that, I mean, I would rather people ask me questions rather than just like see me from afar and just make assumptions to go with that. I mean, just like because of our physical appearance or like the way we dress, especially from a small town, that you get a lot of stares, and you kind of just like, you kind of grow this habit of just turning around and staring back, and that just makes you feel, or makes you seem really unapproachable, which is unintentional. But yeah, just like the whole, that whole struggle of just like how to communicate that idea that yes, you're from a different origin, but like speaking from me, like I've spent my entire life here pretty much, so like I feel like I know more about the U.S. than I do about Egypt. Like I feel like I know more about Christianity and that way of life than I do Islam sometimes. And I mean, sometimes that brings up the whole notion that like, or like the whole emotion that I'm worried someone's gonna ask me a question that I don't know the answer to. But I consider that a good thing, because then I'm not gonna just forget about it after you walk away. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna like find out, just so that like if someone asks me later, I'm gonna know the answer just for me and for like everyone else.
So I think I'll end it there, if I can, and with an Arabic lesson. So the phrase actually in the Arabic is ta'arafu, right? Which the Arabic, the root meaning of this is a mutual engaging of the other person. And it's really important to understand that in order to experience diversity, you have to be willing to ask those questions and to answer those questions. So it requires an openness on both sides. So I thank our panelists for being so open and willing to engage, and for your questions. Thank you all very much.
All right. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Professor Brockopp. I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion and learned something from it.